Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Time and Again, which is episode 3 of season 1 of Star Trek Voyager. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Voyager. One episode at a time. In this video, I cover the first season episode, Time and Again. So Time and Again is the episode in which Voyager encounters a world that was just recently destroyed by a disaster in which everyone on the world was killed. Kes apparently uses her telepathic powers to sense this tragedy and is very disturbed by it. The crew go beam down to investigate, and during this away team, Janeway and Paris are drawn into the past just a few days before the accident occurred, because apparently the disaster caused rifts in time that pull people back in time, and so they get trapped a couple days before the incident. And so Paris wants to warn everyone about it and warn them not that their world is about to be destroyed, but Janeway says no, that would violate the Prime Directive, and she believes in the Prime Directive, so absolutely can't do that. In the meantime, this little boy sees them appear out of nowhere, tries to convince everyone that they're demons, but they try to ignore him, but he follows them around everywhere, but they just want to figure out how to get back to their own time so they don't also die with everyone else. Meanwhile, Chakotay beams down to the planet with Kim and Torres, who figure out some technobabble wibbly wobbly in order to figure out how to get Janeway and Paris back, and Kes can sense them with her telepathic powers. So they beam down and devise to create this rift in time to try to communicate with Janeway. So Paris and Janeway go to investigate what the deal is with there's these protesters who are protesting this energy, which is nuclear energy metaphor. I can't remember what the hell they called it, but it's going to be the cause of the disaster that kills the world. And they get kidnapped by these protesters who are activists who think that they're part of the government there to infiltrate them. And then they decide to move up their timetable for their attack, and Janeway then draws the conclusion that she and Paris are directly responsible for the disaster which will kill everyone in the world. So that changes things. So the Prime Directive no longer applies. In fact, it's her duty to make sure that the disaster doesn't happen now, because if she is the direct cause on it, she needs to correct that. However, people don't believe her, and they take her hostage and take her into the site, which is apparently ground zero for the disaster. So that's where Chakotay and the gang go to try to communicate with Janeway. And then when the rift in time appears, Janeway realizes that is what causes the disaster that kills everyone, and because it's about to intercept the nuclear reactor analogy, and that would cause the polaric energy, I think they called it. But anyway, that's what would cause the disaster. So she takes her phaser out, shoots the rift until it collapses. Once it does, that undoes everything. Time is restored. The people in this world no longer die, and Voyager is right back to where they were, and they just see the world, this peaceful world, and Kes comes up, is like, are you sure they're okay? I thought I felt them die. And Janeway is like, what are you talking about? They're fine. And that's where the episode ends. So one thing I had to say about this episode is let her go. You notice how when Paris is trying to convince Kim to go on this double date. By the way, first mention of the Delaney sisters, who will be mentioned again and again and again, and not seen until season 5. Listening to Delta Flyers podcast, and they were like, "Oh, I don't think we see them until season 4." No, not season 4, season 5. We don't see them until season 5. But anyway, it's the Captain Proton program. They were playing like these evil. Well, anyway, so he's trying to convince Harry to go out on this double date, because it only works for him if it can be a double date. And so this is the first mention we get that Harry has a girlfriend at home, and apparently they were engaged, I believe he mentioned, and he's like, doesn't want to betray her, and Paris says, "Let her go." He says it like that. Anyway, he's like, "You should run a self-diagnostic." I do like how that's the conversation they play again at the end of the episode to show that we're repeating the same thing that we already did. It's interesting. Kind of like the whole, Flash can beat Superman in the race debate that Charlie and Hurley were having in Lost, how that becomes the focal point of anyway, so what I gotta say about this episode, I feel like this is an episode that's very, I don't want to say forgettable, but it's forgotten. It's something that people don't really mention, and it's never really brought up, and it's kind of overlooked. Maybe that's the way to put it. It's an overlooked episode that's, that people don't really talk about or reference, maybe because it's the 3rd episode of the whole show. It's not a bad episode. It's actually kind of good. I really liked it when I first saw it. I think it's in the time travel pantheon of Star Trek. It holds up pretty well. It's just forgotten, pretty much. But here's the thing about this episode. Time travel logic in it is not good. It doesn't particularly make sense. So, they go to investigate this world because it blew up. And they will later discover that the reason why it blew up is because Janeway and Paris were the direct cause, because they traveled back in time a couple days and they caused the accident that blew it up. Now, I'm there. I'm with it so far. I don't know. That's a bit of a loopy-loop thing, because they would have never went to the planet in the first place if it didn't explode. And it only exploded because they went there, so it's like a chicken and the egg situation, which seems to me more like a Type 1 time travel situation, as I talked about before. Type 1 being, whatever happened, method of time travel. And I talked before about how Star Trek is and should not be Type 1 time travel, because it's been clearly established as Type 2, which is you travel back in time, you change the one timeline that's altered, and the only way to fix it is to go back and fix whatever you did to alter the timeline, and so the one timeline is changed. That's what Star Trek always does. So whenever they play around and do different types, it doesn't sit well with me. But it's not necessarily Type 1 time travel, though, because things get even more hairy. Not Harry Kim, but they get more hairy because the way that this situation is resolved is that Janeway figures out that Chakotay, him going back in time to try to rescue her, is what causes the explosion that destroys the world. So she takes her phaser and explodes it. So this complicates things even more, because again, this is kind of a loopy thing, because if she realized that what Chakotay was doing is what caused the accident, so she closes the rift, then the accident never happened, and so the accident never should have happened. Why did the accident happen in the first place? Is there a different loop where Janeway Didn't realize that was causing a loop, and it destroyed. And so she didn't take the phaser and shoot it down, and that's what caused the accident, and that's what caused Voyager to come and investigate, and for them to get trapped back in time. But if I can give myself a headache with this, but I'm just certain that it doesn't make sense. That's all I'm certain of. I'm certain that because it's not like the time loop in the same way like Groundhog's Day or Cause and Effects the time loop. It's a time loop in the way that it's like things don't change. Like everything should happen exactly the same. If Janeway never fixed the timeline, and which causes, the timeline, the fucking, the rift thingy, never closed it with her phaser, then the world never should have exploded in the first place. And if she didn't close the rift, then she shouldn't do it the next time either, because it should be the exact same thing. Like, why would it change? Like, what's different? Why? Because what would be different about the exact same thing would have happened before that Janeway went to investigate, got trapped in the past, and exploded? It's like nothing changed that would have made the outcome any different. It doesn't add up. That being said, I do like it. I do think it's an interesting time travel shenanigans. I'll be honest, this reminds me of a better book, a Voyager novel, which I actually really liked. I hadn't read it in decades. I only read it once when it first came out. And it was the first, I believe, Voyager novel that they wrote. So way back in the mid-90s. And I can't describe it exactly perfectly because it's pretty complicated, but it has something to do with, so they go to this world, and Taurus, like, they're investigating in a away team. Taurus gets trapped in this weird vehicle, and it takes her to, and it's vacant, no one's in the world, but it takes her to a time period where there are people, and they arrest her because she traveled outside of the zone. So how this world works is that people all live in different time periods, but they sort of flow in direct intervals from each other. Like, I can't remember the exact numbers. Like, let's just, for the sake of argument, say 22 years. So 22 years from then, and then another 22 years from then, people live in these increments that are always exactly 22 years apart, and so they can travel to those points in time that are in those increments that are 22 years different, but they can't go outside of that. They can't go like 10 years in the future. It has to be exactly 22 years. And if you go, and that's why it's sort of like a dead area, and if you go into a area outside of those increments, then it's illegal, and that's why they arrest Taurus, because she unwittingly went outside of those increments. But again, been decades since I read it, so I might not be explaining it accurately, but that's the best of my knowledge. That it's something along those lines, and I remember really liking it, and I think it's better than this episode, and this episode reminds me of that, but this is neither here nor there. It always brings up, hey, isn't the clothes that these aliens are wearing quite goofy, and don't they look like real? I can't believe how dated cheesy 90s they look. It looks like Seinfeld. What's the deal with these crazy outfits? It just looks very, I'm sorry, I was just watching Seinfeld and they look very dated as well. But most of Voyager, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, since it's set in the 24th century, doesn't really look that cheesy 90s-ish. But then you get certain episodes like this one, very like the bleached blonde hair, and it's the outfits that they're wearing. Don't they kind of look like Starfleet uniforms in the sense they got the same sort of, have the cutoff with the different color at the same exact sort of point that the Starfleet uniforms do. It's just they have other stripes that keep going, so it looks a little different. But I was like, No wonder they blend in perfectly with their uniforms. That's quite a coincidence that their fashion sense is similar to Starfleet uniforms, but way cheesier looking. And yeah, the storyline with the kid like saying, "Oh, they're demons," that was annoying. I didn't really care for that. Although I did like how Paris made friends with them in the end, and how Paris really wanted to save them, and he's like, "I'm sorry," and that was good. I did like that. So this is another complaint people can have, similar to Homeward, where Picard was all good with letting an entire civilization of people be wiped out because Prime Directive. And it's basically what Janeway wants to do. So, cue the people who are outraged about the Prime Directive. How dare they do that? And, I never really thought of it, but when I do think of it, I'm like, yeah, I agree. I agree with the outrage. Like, why is it okay to let these people die? And the difference is, they do it to themselves is fine, even though we can save them. Doesn't matter, Prime Directive. Like, Prime Directive, I talked about, I don't want to get into this again, but just real quick, because I talked about the Prime Directive before. I believe in it. It makes sense. But it should be the Prime suggestion, because there are exceptions to every rule, and it should be at the discretion of the captain, and particularly in cases where the entire race of aliens are going to be wiped out. There's no point in upholding the Prime Directive, because they're all going to die. If they're not all going to die, if it's just going to kill some people and could affect the society in certain ways or give them more an advantage or whatnot, 100% uphold the Prime Directive. Do not interfere. But if your interference is to save an entire civilization of dying, then what could be the negative consequences of not interfering? They'll all be dead. I don't know. I mean, and then you get into what when one of them survives to become the next Hitler or whatever, but that's very sort of vague, abstract philosophy compared to letting millions of people die. So, fuck the Prime Directive in that case. So I am totally against Janeway, but of course, Janeway's not going to be very consistent about the Prime Directive. I'll have to sort of track that, because apparently she's infamous for disregarding the Prime Directive. So I'll have to keep an eye on that, because she certainly wasn't here. Here she was being a Picard sort of stickler about it, which, I get why some people are against that. And the activists come off as Hollywood-esque, goofy, typical bad guys and not real active, because they're supposed to be like, this has this polaric energy, whatever the fuck. It's supposed to be nuclear energy analogy, as I pointed out, and anti-nuclear activists are not like this. They're not, certainly not as violent as this. And there's been some cases of, them being a bit maybe violent, but not like this. Like, this is just goofy stereotype, very Hollywood-esque. Oh, let's take it with you. Your death is on your hands too. I just don't like this. I don't care for the demonization of activists. And I'm thinking of because it makes me think of New Zealand, because they have a history of resisting nuclear weapons, and because there's a lot of nuclear testing in the Pacific, and so they made a law in the country to outlaw all anything nuclear power. Nuclear submarines can't visit New Zealand. Nuclear is completely banned in New Zealand, which I think is a great thing, and it was brought on by activists in the 80s who were very active, and they weren't doing violence. It's a freaking French government bombed Greenpeace. They had a ship docked at New Zealand. They fucking blew it up and didn't intend to kill people, but they did. And the French agents who did it pretty much got away with it. I mean, they got like a slap on the wrist and got out in 2 years or some bullshit because of, diplomatic shit. But anyway, neither here nor there. Whole point is, I'm very much against demonizing activists, particularly, who do good things. And so this is kind of like a cliche stereotype of, I'm going to shoot you, blah, blah, blah. And it seems like they're actually in the right, that this energy, if it blew up the entire world, now granted it's because of Chakotay's meddling, but still, shows how volatile it is. And yeah, maybe they shouldn't fucking be using it. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. So I don't know. That didn't sit really right with me. But one thing I do really like about this episode is Kes. Very good use of Kes. I like her sort of time travel. She's got like the Guinan sense. It did remind me a lot of Guinan Yesterday's Enterprise, the way she was like sort of remembered, kind of sort of, but not really remembered what happened. But also like how she could telepathically sense where Janeway was. It reminds me that this was a really good character trait of hers, and in season 1 and 2 explored this a bit, and whenever they did, it was great. Season 3 ignored it and turned her into sex object instead, because season 3 sucks and ruined her character. And it would have been so much better like if they kept her around and they explored this. So it was really refreshing. It's really great to go back to these earlier episodes and see when they used her properly. And also, I'm sorry, this is another thing I'm going to be harping on as I go through season 1 of Voyager. Well, harping on in terms of harping on the other people who criticize this, because it's something in the show I actually really like, which is the Kes and Neelix relationship. I think is great. And again, don't get me started on the whole age difference thing. She's essentially in her 20s. He's in his 30s. No big deal. There's much bigger deals in Star Trek, such as Garrick and Zial and Worf dating a 14-year-old. And was that episode the one with the birthright? Yeah. So, no, those are way, way worse. They're like, oh, she's 2 years old. Do you say that your dog is a child because your dog is 8 years old? No, if your dog is 8 years old, he's pretty fucking old. But anyway, sorry, I said I wouldn't get off on this, but it drives me fucking nuts. But anyway, so that was standing, I think, Neelix and Kes. Not always the best, especially when we get into the episodes where Neelix gets super jealous. You get a touch of that here, because when they're doing that little conference and Paris goes to Kes, like, oh, here, you can have my chair. And then, he kind of stands near her and Neelix gives him this look like, ooh, what the fuck are you doing? So that I don't really like that whole jealousy storyline. Neelix comes off as a neurotic asshole in those cases and a bit controlling of her, so I can understand how people are like, oh, maybe the relationship's not the healthiest. But other parts, especially when we get to the episode Trail, which I think is like the best episode for their relationship, but other things like the way he comforts her and is like, it's okay, I think it's a very nice relationship. I really like it. I don't care what anyone else says. I'll die on this hill. I think it's really good. Anyway, don't really got anything else to say about this episode. It was alright. I guess that's why it's kind of overlooked a lot, probably. Anyway, I would now like to thank all those that support me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. This helped me continue with the channel. I'd like to give a big special thanks to Brandon Neilhouse, Jordan Johnson, and Antarius. Thank you all so very, very much for your strong support. Very much appreciated. I'd also like to give a shout out to Tyler Cease, Benjamin Mead, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Miguelisio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Norman Buckwald. He says, so 2-time shenanigan episodes in a row and the Prime Directive thrown in to boot. While it was not really addressed to at least make it clear on Janeway's decision and caretaker. This episode mainly explores Kes's abilities as an Ocampan and makes them fully unknown and unaware for the crew at the end with the reset button, minus Kes's senses. The story does focus on Janeway's role as a mother with Paris, and Paris maybe seeing something of himself with a bratty boy. Granted, the bratty boy was being a Jake-style hack journalist, LOL. And most notably are those horrendous, awful outfits everyone was wearing at this planet. That I joke maybe this planet should be annihilated, at least in the name of fashion. As for a time travel story, it seems amateurish, tries to play a common rule, while especially see in the series with respect to the reset button, and at the end, the first disposable episode in the series. Each rewatch makes me like it less, and its inclusion on a time travel DVD set makes this one by far the weakest on there, especially when there's episodes like Cause and Effect and City on the Edge of Forever in the same set. I'll give it 3 no worries of trade dress infringements outside of the Delta Quadrant out of 10. 3, oh, that's pretty low. That's pretty harsh. Not on the outfits, I totally agree with you there. I wonder what else is on the time travel DVD. Not sure about that. Anyway, next comment is from Kyrie091, who says, time and again, more like, Norman Buckwald, how dare you beat me to being the first comment? Oh, nah, me and Norman are cool, just joking. Besides, unlike me, his comments actually reflect on the episode and add some insight. This episode is fine, I like it okay. It's always been saying Janeway, though I get why the Borg Queen felt that way. Mark, did you see they're bringing back The Naked Gun starring Liam Neeson? It's true. When it comes out, we need an EOE video about how terrible it is compared to the OG. Now, here's the thing. I'm open-minded about The Naked Gun reboot because, well, apparently it's not a reboot. It's a sequel of sorts because they say that Liam Neeson is playing Frank Drebin Jr. So I was told it's a reboot, but some people use that term incorrectly because it doesn't sound like a reboot to me. And if it's not a reboot and they do an original story, I don't know. I almost like it better if it was a reboot and they were just redoing it. But I think they're definitely going to update it to modern times because the original Naked Gun was very set in the 80s, in the early 90s. It was, directly referencing cop shows of the 70s and 80s. So I wonder how different it would be if they're referencing more modern cop shows, which I'm assuming they would. But anyway, my point is, I am not going to go in with the attitude that it's definitely going to suck. Liam Neeson is actually, have you seen him do comedy before? He's actually really good. Especially being a straight man, which is what the role of Frank Drebin requires. So I could see this being really good, but depends on the writing. If the writing is shit, then it doesn't matter how good Liam Neeson is, the movie's going to be shit. And it's Seth MacFarlane's a producer on it, and I've never been a huge fan of his comedy, to be fair. I never got into The Family Guy or any of his movies. I have a friend who gives me shit every time I say The Family Guy. It's like, there's no the, it should be Family Guy. It just makes more grammatic sense to say it that way, so I don't give a fuck. But anyway, sorry, that's neither here nor there. But anyway, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm not going to prejudge it. And if I like it, I'll say I like it. If I hate it, I'll say I hate it. I think my sister's going to abstain from watching it, but I'm very curious. I'm definitely going to go see it. Anyway, that's a Naked Gun talk over with. Next comment is from Ricky, who says, I really like this episode. To me, this was a truly unique time travel episode, and I really liked the story and found it engaging throughout, although I wouldn't say it's one of the best time travel or even in the show itself, but it's still a strong episode as I found it interesting that Janeway and Tom Paris just found themselves in the past, and the ending was actually pretty strong as well. So yeah, a good episode, so my rating is an 8 out of 10. Antarius, next comment, is from Antarius, who says, I think this is a great episode. Almost all members of the crew get their scene, so we're able to get to know them better, especially Janeway is again shown as a new kind of captain who comes more from science than commanding branch. Sadly, the tensions between Maquis and Starfleet are already forgotten besides the briefing scenes between Tuvok and Chakotay. The mystery of the episode is strong and reveal who is responsible for the accident was surprising. It was nice to see some scenes filmed on location. Of course, it is rather convenient that the aliens exactly look like humans, so Janeway and Tom can blend in just fine after changing their outfits. By the way, it's a funny detail how the inhabitants admire the Starfleet uniforms in the shop window. In my opinion, it was a very good idea to show Kes's psychic abilities to the audience, but to keep the crew in the dark because of the reset. If there was no reset, this whole storyline would feel rushed. But now, we the audience can wait for the next time these abilities surface. Next week on Voyager, Neelix asks Janeway if he could wear a uniform too because he really wants to be in Starfleet. My rating is a strong 8 out of 10. Well, here Neelix already asked Tuvok if he could wear a uniform in Caretaker. But I guess you're saying now he's going to ask Janeway. But anyway, yeah, everyone's making fun of the poor outfits. I still say they look similar to Starfleet's, but yeah, that's a good point that you make about how this episode, since it's only episode 3, that showcases all the different characters. I think that is definitely something in its to its advantage. So anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, this is a great episode. This is the third Paradox episode in a row, which Voyager will be famous for. The first 2 episodes are mini Paradox. The elastic band theory should be renamed as the magical resources theory. Why am I talking out of my Earth? Because I know I dropped a few brain cells over the 7 seasons. I know the hidden secret that the writers of the show didn't want us to know. Drum roll, please. At the back of the engineering is a device called the Unlimited Resources Replicator, which includes making shuttlecrafts and human beings. Now, back to the episode. The blonde hair bastard who played the kid was fucking terrible. Will I ever make a proper comment? Who knows? Tune in next week to find out. So my rating is 9 self-diagnostics that Harry refuses to take out of 10. Yeah, he needs to take a self-diagnostic because he needs to let her go. And he let her go. And he was sorry. Yes, the unlimited resources replicator. I love that. That explains everything. To be fair, in the previous episode, they did mention that they were running low on resources and they needed to find more. And they would have to stop using the replicators. And Kes said she'd grow some food. And Neelix said he'd cook it. So they did address this, to be fair. But especially in later seasons, I think 7 of 9 like use their Borg nanites or whatever nanoprobes to create the unlimited resources replicators. I think that comes in later, but it definitely happens. And it creates shuttlecrafts and people. Yeah, I don't know if you saw Prodigy, but they actually tried to make up this BS thing about this. They had the thing on the protostar that created shuttlecraft. And they didn't specifically say, oh, that's why Voyager, but I bet you that's what they were implying. Oh, that's why Voyager had all these shuttlecrafts, because they had this thing that made bullshit. Bullshit. But anyway, next comment is from Brandon Neal House, who says, Technobabble, an analogy for nuclear power and a temporal paradox. Didn't this happen in the previous Voyager episode? Neelix treats Kes like a child who has had a bad dream, and he acts in a creepy way like she's his property. If I was Harry Kim, I wouldn't go on a double date with Tom Paris. I freely admit that I don't understand double dating. It didn't work out for Jake and not. That's for sure. I think Tom Paris is too scared to go on a date without Harry because he needs a scapegoat if things go wrong. Kind of like Kai Wynn. How many times does this episode make me groan aloud? The tequila sunrise clothing of the natives of the planet, which is never named, the timepieces, which I cannot read, Janeway's silly bun haircut, the fascist guards at the power plant, and that annoying child who gives me Jake Lloyd in the Phantom Menace vibes. Voyager is and will continue to be a menace to the majority of species they encounter. 2 annoying kids screaming about demons out of 10. I'm not sure. I don't agree about Voyager being a menace. They're Dennis the Menace, or they're the Phantom Menace. No, I don't think they're a menace. You're spouting Kazon propaganda, Brandon. Come on. We'll get to that later. But no, the Kazons start spreading propaganda about Voyager being evil and fucking with people. I don't think that's true. They always help people where they go. And future Janeway should just go ahead and erase it all because she doesn't give a fuck about anything. But anyway, sorry. I fucking hate Endgame. Anyway, I just gotta work that into everything. So I disagree about Neelix and Kes. I actually thought Neelix was kind of sweet with her. But I can see how he's being a bit overprotective. As I said, the whole look that he gives Paris. Yeah, I'm not into this whole jealousy storyline. I'm not looking forward to that. But anyway, people talk about the previous episode as also time shenanigans, but it's actually not. It was just an echo. Although they're trying to say that the echo happened first, and so that's what attracted Voyager there, and then Paris is like, oh, how could we be pulled by something that hasn't yet happened yet? Am I making any sense? And Janeway's like, no, you're not, but that's okay. I'm like, shut up, Janeway. He's totally making sense. She's just trying to make a bullshit excuse for the stupid plot that doesn't actually make any sense. It's kind of the same thing here because they get pulled in by the planet exploding, but the planet only exploded because they were there, and they were only there because the planet exploded, and because that caused them to go back and explode the planet, but they were... Okay, sorry. This loop, it doesn't make any fucking sense. But anyway... Thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So my rating for Time and Again out of 10 is going to be a 7. Very good. It's fine. Yeah, the time travel logic is a bit weak, and Janeway misusing the Prime Directive is annoying, and their outfits are terrible, and the little kid is annoying. But it's still think it's got a fun episode. It's got good interactions. Like, Antares had a good point about how it showcased all the different characters and different crew. I do love, by the way, how the Patreon comments were split. Some people loved it, some people hated it. It's like, and that's always really interesting when that ends up happening. And I'm kind of in the middle, closer to the people who liked it, to be fair, than those weirdos that hate it. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But yeah, so I can see why people were kind of split on this episode. But yeah, I don't think it's good enough to give an 8 because of all those problems I listed. But it was entertaining. It was a good use of interesting time travel, even if they did fuck up the time travel logic. It was still an interesting use of time travel, and he got interesting interactions between Janeway and Paris, sort of them two getting to know each other. And I love the use of Kes's telepathic abilities. I really wish they would have utilized that a lot more. And also we see Chakotay in command for the first time, and his commanding style, and how he's him and Tuvok kind of butt heads a little bit, but he overall respects Chakotay's authorities. That was interesting. So yeah, there was a lot of good, interesting character. Season 1, as I'm saying, in Voyager has a lot of good character interactions, which will go straight in the toilet once we get to season 5, but anyway, so I keep foreshadowing that because I'm enjoying the nice character interactions and the first 2 seasons, which are really good at it. Anyway, that is it for my review of Time and Again. So if you enjoyed this video, you had a blast, you liked it, had fun, say, hey, Mark, I really like your channel. How can I support you? Well, let me tell you how. I don't know why I'm in a goofy mood, but let me tell you how. You can leave a like on the video. You can leave a comment below. Let me know how right I am and how wrong other people are. Or you can say I'm full of shit. I don't care. It's fine. Yeah, subscribe so you can keep up with more videos that I put out. And huge fan of my channel. Well, I got a suggestion for you as well. You can support me on Patreon. Link in the description below. I do a lot of different rewards, such as a patron-only series of videos that I do just exclusively for my Patreon supporters, where I revisit reviews that I have already made. How about that? Because every time I get to an episode I already reviewed, you're like, some people are like, hey, you skipped over it. And I was like, I didn't, but you got to be on Patreon to see my recent updated thoughts on that episode. But yeah, other stuff too, if you know, and no pressure if you feel like it. But anyway, let's see what's coming up next on my humble little channel here. So Monday will be my review of Heart of Stone. Wednesday I'll be doing a Patreon requested video ranking the TNG-Q episodes. Thursday I'll be reviewing the Phage. Oh, sorry, it's just Phage. Again, it makes more grammatic sense to say the Phage, not just Phage, but whatever. And on Saturday is the Destiny. No, I'm kidding. That time it does make more sense just to say Destiny. Yeah. I'll be reviewing the DS9 episode Destiny on Saturday because it's your destiny. You tell me in the comments below what movie that's a quote from. Do it. Anyway, be sure to check out as I continue to cover Star Trek Voyager and Star Trek Deep Space Nine and many other Star Trek videos and many videos and other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.